It's certainly been very eventful, and to really look at the current changes that are taking place internationally, this has really formed the dialogue that is taking place over this week. Looking high level, I would say that the two main themes of discussion this week have been around what the second Trump presidency will mean for the world and the international community, and the role of the United States as still the world's largest economy in driving innovation, investment, and other forms of development. The other theme that has also been focused upon has been the evolution of AI and the impact this will have internationally. Specifically, to relate to your question, looking at South Africa this year will be front and center on the world stage. As we know, this is the first time that an African nation has actually hosted the G20 summit that will take place later this year. And the theme that has been outlined for this year's G20 that South Africa with its presidency will lead upon is looking at sustainable growth, equality, innovation, and these are many of the themes that have been actually evaluated and looked at within this year's World Economic Forum. Of course, there has been a delegation from South Africa and from other African states at the forum that have been incredibly important in actually forming the dialogue and discussion around the macro issues that are taking place internationally currently. Africa House this year hosted an array of leaders from South Africa and from other African states, and I think this type of space certainly served as an opportunity for international delegates to understand what some of the key priorities are for not only South Africa but across Africa as the continent as a whole.
As an investor yourself, an experienced investor around the world, in the Americas, in Africa, in Europe, what is it when you look at what is it that you look for in a country that South Africa has, but also that South Africa doesn't have, that we can work on in order to make sure that we're not just the most industrialized economy in the world, but we pull other countries along with us?
So certainly for any investment opportunity, there are certain key proxy indicators that will be used to identify whether a particular region or geography presents opportunity. Now, looking at natural resources, this historically has all been a reference point that has been used. And in addition to that, human capital, which South Africa has in plentiful supply with having an incredibly young population, is something that also is incredibly desirable for investors to look at as an area of allocation. What we also have seen from South Africa is that it is a country that has really sought through its government to improve and enhance its governance processes, and this is something that certainly in signalling to international investors that South Africa is a country that is ready to do business, that is a country that is actually looking to not only attain FDI from the international community but also develop domestic companies that then will actually serve international customers and stakeholders around the world. It's something that certainly has been highlighted in international forums such as the World Economic Forum and others that have taken place over recent years. The other context to highlight is that South Africa, for many international investors, is still viewed as a gateway to the African continent. This partly relates to historical reasons and also looking at some cultural factors such as the widespread use of English language. This is something that certainly for international investors and indeed stakeholders is something that is viewed as accessible when accessing the African continent. And I think with the role that South Africa plays this year in actually hosting the G20 summit and being the first African nation to host this forum, this also will present an incredible opportunity to look at how the developed nations alongside developing countries are actually collaborating to invest in South Africa and across the African continent, and also build those key partnerships that will be required to accelerate this going forward.
Climate finance, a buzzword for the past couple of years, still a buzzword, something that is quite important, something that Donald Trump's presidency is also worrying about, him moving to his views on climate change, not really supportive of that movement. As a climate investor, as someone who's looking at that sector, what are the priorities for you? Is there anything to worry about in terms of where the world is going in this transition that is so needed? Because when you look at a country like Switzerland, in the past couple of years, we wouldn't be standing here at this time. It wouldn't be this warm. It's been warm these past couple of days, and it's something that tells you that even global warming is real. As yourself, as a climate investor, what is most important to you? Are you worried about what's happening when it comes to climate finance, and as far as what Donald Trump's influence is going to be?
So certainly political priorities are something that evolve and shift over time, as we have seen in many geographies around the world. What I would highlight is that the role in combating climate change and actually pursuing a more sustainable future is something that requires both private and public sector investment into this area. One thing that I certainly would highlight, including from many US companies this week, is that many companies from around the world are still very committed to looking at where they can actually invest capital to accelerate initiatives and endeavours to deliver sustainability going forward. I believe this is a trend that will continue, as we have seen through various international forums such as the UNFCCC COP summits, the most recent one taking place in Baku in Azerbaijan several months ago. The international community certainly are engaging on this topic very seriously, and of course the role of government and politicians is something that is integral to all of this, but this is a global stakeholder challenge, and one that requires the private sector and private capital to actually enhance this transition. In recent years, we have heard from many political leaders highlight that governments alone cannot achieve sustainability without that public-private cooperation and partnership. And I believe and I am optimistic about the role of private-public partnerships to actually deliver sustainability going forward. And I think this is something that certainly will continue for the foreseeable future. And very briefly, as we will see during this year's G20 in South Africa, this has been a key area of focus for the South African government. One of the things that was highlighted a couple of years ago by President Ramaphosa is that a just transition in actually achieving sustainability is something that the international community and international investors and financiers must look at in achieving and delivering the goals that are required to ensure climate change does not become something that is insurmountable in the future. What we can see is that across Africa there are many initiatives that are taking place to actually deliver sustainable development, and indeed for international investors and institutional investors from around the world, that opportunity to actually invest into that future is something that is incredibly enticing.
Ameer, thank you very much for your time. Ameer Ibrahim is a climate investor out of the UK, somebody who has been traveling the world, really looking at climate change and many sustainable development initiatives, making sure that there is enough when it comes to support from a public-private partnership, and particularly there's enough support for developing nations such as South Africa. Something interesting that is going to be looked at this year as South Africa heads the G20 in this particular year at the end of November, with the whole world looking inward into the country. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I am Xolani Mbanjwa in Davos, Switzerland.
Cut.